Hello friends, you're with the Lonesome Gamer, and tonight I'm gonna play Empires of the Middle Ages. Now, this is the second edition of the game. The first one is by SPI Games, and it's a really old game. I think it's from 1980 or something. And that one is by Decision Games, published by Decision Games. I don't know who the designer is at the moment. It's not written here on the top. This is going to be a real long one that will keep us busy a few weeks, I guess. So yeah, I say let's simply start and set it up. So we see here the map, and well, it's it's pretty big, as you can see. I really have to step back to show it fully. And yeah, you can see it's a map of Europe, and here a little bit of the Near East. So let's see what informations do we have here. Well, first of all, the map shows areas. That is different to the first edition, where the map is basically done of connected boxes, and these are laid over a map of Europe. So it's more like a point-to-point movement system, but in the end all the connections are the same. So from a play point of view, it didn't change anything. It's just it just looks different, and this might be a little more fiddly because of all these markers, which could be simply shifted on the other map. But I kind of like that this one is bigger and in a way maybe more beautiful, but that's hard to tell. Let's see. Well, the map is divided in different provinces, and these provinces lie in different language zones. And we can see here the different languages, and we have language families, like here the Romanic group, and here the Germanic group, and so on. And that's kind of important because it makes an attempt of an action of a ruler more likely to be successful if it happens in the same language group, usually. Apart from that, by the way, these markers here, they indicate that the areas have a different language than indicated. That is simply part of the starting setup of the scenario. And by the way, we're going to play, of course, the big campaign scenario. Basically, I want to play a 6-player scenario, but the scenario starts as a 2-player scenario. One player plays Byzantium down here with the court in Constantinople, and 3 players could play together and plan together and so on the Frankish Empire. And then when the heir of Charlemagne dies, this empire will be split into 3 new empires. And in addition to that, from then on, also other additional empires might pop up. So because after this splitting of the Frankish Empire, we would have then 4 players, and then we can bring in 2 more players depending on where there are free areas on the map. Similar to language, religion is also an important factor in the game. A ruler that shares the religion of a region is more likely to be able to influence that region. And we have as a starting religion in most of these areas here, Roman Catholic. Down here, and I forgot to mark that, are Muslim regions. Same here, these two regions are also Muslim. And here in the Byzantine Empire, we see Eastern Orthodox mainly. Here, the whole East, all these areas here and Scandinavia, they are all pagan, and each pagan area is basically its own religion, okay? But they can be converted, and that will definitely happen during the game. One problem of the game is, especially well, for specific type of markers, that there will not be enough of that type. So, for example, here these pagan markers. So I kind of placed them here on the borders to indicate that, well, all these areas that are adjacent here are pagan, and that works quite well. But just to explain that, I wasn't able to place it in every single country here. And that's a similar thing here, for example, with the claims. I placed also claims here in the different, at the borders to indicate that. Okay, in addition to that, to the language and the religion, the regions or the provinces also have a specific population, and that population, as far as I remember, doesn't change during the game. Or let's say it's kind of a population density, okay? And that is indicated by that first number behind the religion. So that is Roman Catholic. That kind of shows the language. That's Roman Catholic. And that is the density of the population. And that goes from -3, for example, here, Switzerland, or here, the steppes, up to 4 in Venice. I think that is probably the densest one. No, also Constantinople. And I don't know, Ile-de-France is 3. Might be Venice and Constantinople. I guess they are the only ones with a 4. And that also can influence the actions of the ruler. And finally, we have here in bracelets the social state, and that indicates here the starting value. The social state is something that will often change throughout the game. And here, for example, it already did at the scenario setup, or it might also be an errata. Here it shows a -1, here it's a +1. And you also use social state markers of your own color to indicate that you possess a specific region. So here you can see that. and these can change, for example, here to a 0 or something. And the lowest possible value is a -3, and the highest possible value is 2 higher than the starting value that is written here. So when it comes to the errata, this is something we have to keep in mind. Actually, I'm not sure if I will be able to keep that in mind. I might forget that. But okay, it's not that terribly important. I think it's just 2 areas on the map, or maybe 3, where there is a different, where the map seems to show a misprint or something. But that is not super important in the end. Furthermore, we have sea zones here on the map. You can see here, divided by these white dotted lines. All kinds of sea zones here. And yeah, that's basically all we can say about the map. Now, we have here game turn record, and these come not with the game. And then we have here for each player, you can see here and over here, we have a leader statue display and a treasury. So the treasury obviously shows how much money everyone has, and we start with $12 for everyone. And the leader statue display shows the abilities of a leader. We have a combat and administration and a diplomacy ability, and the lowest value is 9, is 1, and it can go up to a 9. 9 is a complete genius, and yeah, that will happen not too often in the game. Now, here Charlemagne starts with a 999. I mean, this is more or less half god, right? This is completely ridiculous. But that is this starting configuration, and the goal for the Frankish Empire is basically to grab as much land and also as much rich land as possible, as long as this guy lives. And he will live till the year 815, or maybe longer, but he will definitely live to that year. So leaders can die during the game randomly, but they will definitely live. He has a special rule. He lives at least until 815. And actually, what's a little odd, if a leader uses his ability, which shows a very high number, then the odds that he dies are lower. That doesn't seem extremely logical. You might think, okay, with combat I can see that, but with administration or something, I mean, I don't know if he might fall from his desk chair or something like that, but I don't really see why it should give you better odds in surviving if you are a good administrator. That seems a little strange. But that is a fact, and therefore, if you have everywhere a 9, it is more likely that you will get pretty old. So he might not even die at 815. That is just the first possible moment he can die. This guy could live on for quite a long while. And then, if he dies, his son will take over. I haven't forgotten his historical name. And if that guy dies, then the empire is split in 3 parts. That means 3 new players, or 3 players will then appear with also 3 leaders. Over here, it's Constantine V. He has far less good values, still pretty solid. Especially his combat value is very good. It's a 5, and then it drops to 3 and 3. Now we must see that the possible values are a 1, then it's a 2, and then it's a 3. There is no 4, but the next one is a 5, and then it jumps up to a 9. So a 5 is actually already the second best value, so it is already a pretty good value. I've already announced that I'm going to use quite a bit of house rules, and I think that that's not bad for the game. Basically, they say somewhere, I'm not sure where I found it actually, but somewhere in the scenario descriptions it is written that the campaign wasn't really play tested actually. And it might be pretty unbalanced. It's more to simulate the Middle Ages, and so I mean that is already written in the rules. I think tweaking a little bit with the rules is not a big issue. Apart from that, this second edition adds additional rules. I'm going to stay mostly with or I'm going to stay true mostly to the first edition rules. So the basic rules of the game basically, and there's only very little that I want to change there. When it comes to the additional optional rules, however, there are a few things that I want to change. Some of the optional rules I'm going to take only partly, and so you see, it's not the base concept that I'm changing in my house rules, just some of the additional stuff. One thing is, I want to limit the treasury to 150 per empire, to prevent the empires from hoarding. Otherwise, I feel that could be sometimes a little boring in some situations, especially the Byzantines. They are pretty isolated down here, and they could hoard a pile of money until it comes to a real clash with the other empires. And then they are just super rich, and that might not be too interesting then to see them fight other empires. So I kind of want to avoid that, and therefore the upper limit is $150. And by the way, maybe I'm gonna put my house rules on my webpage, lonesome.com, so that you can follow that idea a little better, and So let me see. The game starts in the year 755, and it will go to the year, I don't know, 1470 or something like that. So it's going to be a very long game. The second edition adds a few interesting things to the game. One are time-specific event cards. You see them over here. These event cards, oh gosh. They show a little time frame here on top. And they are shuffled in the deck only during that time period. So that's kind of cool. I want to use these. They add definitely a little bit of flavor. Another thing are specific leaders. For example, this guy here. They come also during a specific time frame. And you can see here they can only show up in a specific language group. The way I'm going to play these leaders is if someone else out of this language group draws that card, well, he's obviously not able to play it, so he's allowed to discard it and draw a new one. And then you see here, these are the numbers, the values that are added to these leader stats. The rules of the second edition say that you are allowed, if you have a card, you will hold that card in your hand, and then if you want to do a specific action with your leader, you can play that card and use then one of these stats for that specific action, and that's it. Then the card is gone. To be honest, I think that is pretty boring. What I want to do is, if one player of the specific language zone draws that leader, he can play that leader. If he doesn't have another leader already played on the board, another leader card, then he's allowed to play that leader. Otherwise, he must discard it. And the values will simply be added here to the values of here in the leader statute display. A maximum number is always 9. So if you add 3 and you already have 9 or so, it can't happen. The maximum is always 9. And you can use that leader then as long as he survives, but the leader checks or the statute checks will be made following the numbers here in the leader statute display and not the sum of the numbers of the display or that one here. You will understand what that means if I go a little more into detail. I just wanted to explain that's how I want to use these leader cards. I think that adds a lot of flavor to the game if you see the different leaders showing up here during time, ruling the country for a while and then dying, and then there will be some less important leaders following, but from time to time you see these big ones and they can also really make a difference. I like that idea a lot. It might change the balance of the game quite a bit, but honestly I play that game just for the experience and not for the winning thing or something. And that brings us right away to the winning conditions here. That's another house rule I'm going to use. Usually at the very end of the game, victory points would be counted. And basically you get victory points for every region you control, and if you have a claim to that region, it depends also on the status of the region. You get more victory points if the region has a high social status. You get additional points if you have a claim to the region, and you also get points for colonizing areas and for what is it called if you change the religion? Damn it, I forgot the word. You know what I mean. Yeah, well, if you change if you change the religion of an area, that gives you also additional points. I find that a little problematic because basically you could say everything you do during that 50-hour game doesn't matter, and it only comes down to the very end of the game, and yeah, that's when it all counts. So I kind of want to change that. On the other hand, I thought if there are predetermined score rounds, then it could also come to a point where people, right before the score round, try to grab a specific country, and it's not that important if they can hold that country or not. They just want to grab it or destroy the infrastructure or something to make life for the opponent harder or get a quick point, and that is kind of maybe not the best thing you would usually do to make your country grow. It's just for the points. It's just a gamey way of playing. So to avoid that, what I'm going to do is at the beginning of each round, I'm going to roll a die, and I'm not absolutely sure yet if on a 10-sider, on a 10, or on a 6-sider as 6. I might think about that. Maybe I'm even going to change it during the game. I mean, it's not that important. But I'm going to roll a die, and if a specific number shows up, I'm going to count points, and in that way, it's not that predictable. But we're not going to do that before the empire splits up. So up to the year 800 whatever, when the empire will split up, there will be no scoring of the points. In addition, we have the option to colonize an area. This is basically an optional rule that also that already was part of the base game, and it basically means to change the language of an area, and that will give you an advantage if you want to rule that area. Now, I don't want to follow here the procedure of the base game because it's a pretty complicated thing. Every turn you have to count a specific number of colonization points that you will generate, and then you can use them to colonize these areas. But I don't want to do that. So what I want to do is there are a few cards here. Maybe that is even one of those. A few event cards. No, that isn't. So anyway, there are a few event cards where it is written they give you colonization points. And if a player draws one of these cards, what he's allowed to do is he could either use that card to colonize one area with a population up to 2 people, or he can partly colonize an area with a population actually that's not what I wanted, up to 1 person, or he can partly colonize an area with a population of 2 or more people. And if he wants to do that, he has to kind of place a marker there or whatever. And then if he draws another one of these event cards, this area would be fully colonized. That's what I want to do. It makes it much easier in my opinion. In addition, the second edition comes with some kind of special buildings that you could build. For example, a palace here, or commerce, also monasteries, and they give you some advantage in specific operations. And when I played the game in a multiplayer game, we ended up basically only building these buildings in all these different areas like crazy, and spent all our actions to optimize the different areas. And that is not exactly the goal of the game, I think. There should be more of these interactive actions like attacks, diplomacy, pillaging, stuff like that. Instead of that, we ended just up optimizing our own countries, and that wasn't too great of an experience. So what I'm going to do is, because I kind of like these, buildings. They add also a little bit of flavor to the game. There are cards that, for example, that one here, the Viking Surge, that says here, if the player controls one or more of the Norway, Sweden, Denmark areas, the player immediately either receives one fleet in any one of these areas or places one commerce marker in any area adjacent to the North Atlantic, and so on. And the commerce marker would be one of these, well, buildings. So there are these event cards that allow you to get one of these markers, and that's the way I want to let them enter the game. As I said, in the first edition they were not there at all, and also the second edition only takes them as an option. So therefore I think that is a good idea. It's a good compromise. You have these, they give a little bit of extra flavor, but you don't focus too much on these new buildings. The same applies to the fleets or the armies. They were also not part of the base game. And yeah, you can basically now construct fleets and armies, and you got to maintain those and all. And same thing here, you only can do that if you draw an event card, and then you are allowed to maintain these guys, and if they die or you cannot maintain them anymore, they go away again, and you cannot rebuild them due to an action. You don't need armies to fight a war in this game. They just give you a permanent advantage here. And I'm only gonna allow them to enter the game due to an event card. I simply don't want to make that overly complicated here. Okay, so I'm sorry that I explained that much now about my house rules without you knowing even the standard rules, but if some people know them, I just want to kind of explain what will change during the game. Okay, so I guess now we're ready to go, and I'm not even sure who starts. Okay, I remember, it depends on the statue of the leaders. So here we have a game turn sequence. And that is, by the way, a player 8 from BGG. I'm going to use partly that and partly the charts that come with the game. So, this is a little tricky because it's basically the scenario that says that it's the end of a round. So here's the thing, we have different game turns, and each game turn covers 25 years. So you can see the first game turn goes here from the year 00 to 25, depending on the century. Then it goes from to 50 and so on. And the game turns are then again divided into 5 rounds. So that means that 5 game rounds cover each 5 years. Okay? And then again, we have the player turns. So that means during a game round, each player can do up to 5 actions, and that is a player turn. So, for example, if the Frankish player does 5 actions, then the Frankish player did his player turn, and then if this player does his actions, then the Byzantine player also did his player turn, and then we would come to the next game round. And then if this goes from 5 to 1, we would go into the next game turn, which would bring this then up to here. Okay? So I think, because technically we would be somehow here in the middle of a game turn. This is kind of weird because it's basically the last round of a game turn. So I'm not absolutely sure if I want to treat that. I could roll for a schism here or not. Well, why not? Let's do it. At the beginning of a round, you basically roll. You have to check different things. And also at the beginning of the turn. So first, at the beginning of the turn, we do the Theological Politics. And that is now a roll on the schism table, which is, that one here. And here we have to check the status over the Byzantine influence over Rome. So that means at the moment the Byzantines have a claim on Rome, but they don't control it. So let's see. Byzantine possession, Byzantine tie to Rome. I think that's what we have here. So now we got a roll. And we will see if if the schism remains, or if the two churches will be unified. So let's see. Okay, that's a 3. Maybe we see something interesting here right at the beginning. No, that is not the case here. You can see this is the tie to Rome. So the 3 says that the schism remains. Only on a 2 there would be a unification and also on a 12, I guess. Okay. Unification would simply mean that Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic would now count as the same religion. And this is something we have to check at the beginning of each game turn. So after every 5 rounds. And in this specific case, we're going to check it right in the next round again, because this is this weird starting situation here. Okay. Let's continue. What else happens here? Damn it. There we go. Well, we have then the year cards distribution, and that means now every empire will get 5 of these year cards. And that's a little stupid, because the year cards have exactly the same back as the event cards do. So that kind of sucks. But anyway, 2, 3. And 5. Okay, and now it's time to explain basically the main mechanics of the game. So let's take one of these year cards here at the bottom. Players they don't inspect these year cards when they get them. They just place them before them, and when it's their turn, they can decide to do endeavors. And there are 5 different endeavors. There's Conquest. Well, obviously, it's the attack of an adjacent country. You can also do Conquest over a specific number of sea areas. And that applies to all endeavors. You can cross the sea, basically, but only to a certain amount of areas. And there are also restrictions. It's getting harder the further you have to go. Then there is this pillage option, which basically allows you to pillage also an adjacent area, and you can reduce the social status of that area, and also, if you're lucky, you might gain gold out of this operation. Then we have the ruling endeavor, which allows you to improve the social status of one of your provinces. The fortification, that allows you to build a fortification. And finally, a diplomacy option, which would allow you anywhere on the map, that doesn't have to be adjacent, to try to build a diplomatic tie with the ruler or of that specific province, or not exactly the ruler, simply with the specific province. If the ruler doesn't want you there, it doesn't matter. If you're successful with a diplomatic action, you can place a diplomatic tie in that province. That diplomatic tie can then be converted with a little bit of luck and under specific conditions to a claim, and if you control a province with a claim, then you get additional points out of that. You could be very lucky, and thanks to some diplomatic actions, it is possible that you will actually kind of conquer the area so that it will become part of your empire, just because of your diplomatic talent here. Okay, now let's see how that works. Well, you have to decide before you flip a card what you want to do, and you have to indicate your target area and also very often your base area from where you want to do that. Let's say, for example, I want to attack Bavaria from Swabia. So that's what I would say, and then I have to check the, I'm not absolutely sure what it is called, some kind of the ability, or I think it's the effectiveness rating. Yeah, that's what it's called. I have to check the effectiveness rating of my leader. And I would do that by using the combat value. In this case, if I do a conquest action, I would use the combat value, kind of a base value, and then I have to use a ton of modifiers. And here, for example, we could see that this is Conquest. So we would add the active leader's combat statue and the social state of the base area. Okay, so in this case, if I would do it from Swabia, I would add a 0 to my active, to my combat statue. So the richer your base area is, the better the odds are that the conquest will be successful, because you simply have more resources right in the background and stuff. Then you have the target area modifiers. What you would do here is you would add the social state of a target area and the fortification strength of the target area and the defending leader's combat stature. If there is no defending leader, well, so if it's not a player that I attack, but just a neutral area, then it's a 0 simply. And then I have to add a language modifier and a religion modifier. And these can be also sometimes negative modifiers. We can also see that here. So for example, here I had to subtract 1 if it's a related language but a different church, and I have to subtract 2 if it's an unrelated language and another religion. That's kind of weird. Yeah, but that's how it works, I guess. And yeah, so I do all that. In this case, I have a related language. Well, let's see what we have here. We have active leader combat statue, that's a 9. Base areas is 0, so it's 9. We don't have an army. Target area social state would be a 0, so that remains 9. Target area fortress is also a 0, so remains 9. Defending army is something we don't have. Defending leader statue, combat, okay, this is not too impressive. It's also so this is my court, so that means my leader has that language here, which is the Old High German. We can see that here. And this is here exactly the same language. So, therefore it's a related language. I find that very confusing, but a different church. Unrelated language, other religion. Let me see that. That's odd. So, yeah, okay, we can see that also here. So this is a related language, so we have to subtract. No, wait a minute, it's not. It's actually the same language. So that means we don't have to subtract anything. And it's the same religion. Yeah, so that means we don't have to subtract anything. So this is a little bit boring. Basically, it's just our leader value. Let's make it a little bit interesting. Let's say we want to attack from Franconia, Bohemia. That's not possible. Let's say Silesia. Okay, that's a little more interesting. So again, we have our leader statue. That is a 9. Then we add this one here, so it's a 10. We have to subtract the social state of that, which is a 0 at the moment. But this time we have a different religion, it's pagan. So that would be a 2. So we would go down to 8. And we have also a unrelated language. So that would bring us down to 6 then, because this is a Slavonic language zone. So in this case, we would be at 6, and then what we would do is we would flip this thing here, and we would see here Conquest, the result is a C, and that shows 4 higher than that. So this is a little weird, because the rules say that symbol means if the leader's rating is equal or higher than 4. That's how you have to read that. I find that very strange, but this is what the rules say. And so that means you have the conquest result. It's a successful conquest if you have a 4 or higher in your effectiveness rating. So in this case, we would have taken Silesia here. To be allowed to do the conquest, I have to pay $2, if I'm not mistaken here. Gosh, this is a mess with all these tables. I'm pretty sure I have to pay $2. That is something you always have to pay if you want to do a conquest. That's simply the cost of the battle. Now, before I flip this thing, what I'm allowed to do is I can decide, hey, I want to have better odds. I have only a battle rating of 4 or something. That's not enough. I want to have a higher rating, a higher effectiveness rating. So I could spend additional money to the 2 that I've already spent. And for each buck I spend, I can now simply add 1 to my effectiveness rating. And there is basically no limit. I can simply say, okay, I want to spend that much money. And then I flip the card and see what happens. However, there are cards where there simply is no success, right? So if I absolutely want an area, it doesn't make sense to say, okay, I spent $50 or something, because there are cards where simply is no success. So I can never be sure if I really will get a successful result here. Then, in addition to the result, there can be also effects on the target area and on the base area, and that would be then written here. You can see that, for example, here or there. And so, for example, if I would do a pillage and I would have a higher rating than 4, I would gain gold of that pillage. And in addition, if I would have a higher or equal rating than 2, that area would lose 1 social status. So, for example, if I had a 3 effectiveness rating, I wouldn't get the gold, but I would be good enough in pillaging to destroy big parts of the houses and fields of the area, so that they would lose some of their prosperity. And for example, here it's kind of a similar thing. If I could do a fortification action, so I could build fortresses And I would be successful in doing so if I had a 3 or higher, but the region where I would do it, in this case that would be the base region, that's kind of a specific thing, that region would lose 1 social status if I would have a effectiveness rating of 4 or less. So let's say I have exactly a 3. It would be successful. I could build the fortresses, but I don't know. I would have rated the region so badly or so that the social status goes down by 1. So that's basically how that works. And then down here we have the so-called leader checks, and if there would be any numbers written here, then if the numbers would be equal to the value of the specific ability in the leader statue display, then the leader would die. So let's say if I did an administration, if I did an action that would require administration, like for example the ruling action, and then there would be written down here a 3, then I would see, oh, I have an administration value of 3, so that means that leader would then die, and I had to roll the abilities of the new leader. Okay, so that's basically how these cards work. And that is, in a way, the main mechanism of this whole game. It all works with these cards, or most of the things do. Now, there is also an option to defend yourself against conquest, against pillage actions, or also against diplomatic actions. But to do that, you also have to play a card. Now that brings you in trouble if you are one of the first players, because if you play all your cards and then someone else attacks you, you might not have cards left to defend yourself. So you always might consider not playing all your actions to keep some cards. You always have to play at least one of your cards. That is mandatory. You have to do one action. You cannot use all your 5 cards to defend yourself. Okay. So I think now we are really more or less ready to go, but I must say well, before we go in the first round, we might roll for raiders, and that's another house rule that I came up with, because usually raiders would show up on a predetermined time, but I also want to modify that and add a little bit of a randomness here. In this case, the way I want to do that is, we have 3 types of raiders: the Vikings, the Magyar, and the Saracens. So, and here we have the years when they will show up. Now what I'm going to do is, I'm not going to let them surely show up at that time, because that, I don't know if it makes a lot of sense, if you know when these guys will show up. But I'm going to roll if they will show up or not. And, well, I'm going to do that not at the beginning of each game turn, but during each round of the game. And therefore, I think the odds kind of remain the same, but yeah, as I said, it's a little less predictable. Now, during the first game turn, I'm not even sure if someone can show up. No, it doesn't seem so. The Saracens can show up from 76, which would be the next round, and the Vikings can only show up from 800, the Magyar from 900, so there is no reason now to roll if any raiders will show up. Okay, so finally we could start now with the first actions of the players, but I want to load this up here. And I babbled a ton about these rules, about the house rules. I'm not sure if that was a great video, to be honest. Let's take it for an introductional video, and I'm also gonna write that as a subtitle at the beginning of the video, and also write that as a title for the video, so that the people who are not too interested in this don't waste too much time in watching that stuff. But I kind of felt before I start such a big thing now, this might be a good idea to explain the basic concepts and my house rules here, and that simply took some time. Okay, so in the next video we're going to start that. Hope to see you then, or on lonesomegamer.com. Bye.